Hi everyone, welcome to Socorro's webinar series, Coastal Observing in Your Community. Thank you so much for sharing your virtual lunch hour with us. My name is Abby Wakely, Socorro's Communications Director, and I will be facilitating and moderating the webinar. Socorro is hosting this series to discuss, highlight, and raise awareness about coastal ocean observing activities in the Southeast US and beyond. Socorro is the regional coastal ocean observing system for North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. We are one of 11 that make up the NOAA-led U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System, also known as USIUS. Our mission is to sustain and promote observations that help keep you safe. This is a quick snapshot of the technology we support to accomplish our mission. I wanted to highlight two upcoming student opportunities that Socorro has open right now. We have the Vimbu Subramanian Ocean Scholars Award. It's an opportunity to present your research at an in-person meeting or virtual conference, and the 2021 Data Challenge, where we are asking students to create tools using Socorro buoy or coastal shore station data. Both proposals are due March 12th, 2021 at 5 p.m. All right, let's get to the reason you are all here, the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. You are encouraged to type questions for the presenter or technical questions for me in the Q&A box. I will respond to them directly or post the questions to our presenters after their presentation. We are recording this webinar today and we'll be posting the recording on the Socorro website. We are very excited to welcome Mary Connolly and Bob Cremian from the Nature Conservancy. They will be presenting Regional Ocean Data Sharing, Southeast Sand Resource Project. Mary serves as the Nature Conservancy's Director of Marine Conservation for the Southeast United States. She leads the regional coastal and marine conservation initiatives focused around climate adaptation, ocean protection, and sustainable fisheries. Her roles include strategic planning, facilitation, and partner engagement. Bob Cremian is the Southeast Ocean Conservation Specialist for the Nature Conservancy. Based in Savannah, Georgia, he works on sustainable fisheries and ocean protection related projects ranging from the Atlantic coast to the Gulf of Mexico. I want to thank you guys both so much for joining us. And Mary, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and promote you to presenter. If you just give me 1 second so you can go ahead and share your screen. All right, I am promoting you to presenter.
Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes, I am.
Great, thanks a lot, Abby. Well, I'm really excited to be here today to share with you a project that we've been working with Socorro on for the past year. It is focused on sand resources in the Southeast and is part of the NOAA Regional Ocean Data Sharing Initiative, which has provided funding to regions across the United States to help tackle coastal and ocean management issues that have cross-boundary implications, particularly relating to how we can encourage increased data sharing and outreach to partners and coastal managers and users across the US. Today in the Southeast, we focused on sand resources for the first year, so that's what I'll be highlighting today. I'm excited to be joined by my partner, Bob, who is working also with the Conservancy to lead this project. And I see that several of our steering committee members have joined the call. So thanks to them for all the work that they've put into it. Before we get started, I have a quick poll question just to get our heads wrapped around sand in the Southeast. So Abby, could you share that poll?
It is being shared right now. And we are getting some input.
Great. How's it looking?
We have 83% voted, so I'm going to give it maybe 5 more seconds.
Okay, if you haven't voted, now's your time to show your knowledge.
All right. 88% voted, and we have a winner. Should I go ahead and close the poll and share the results?
That would be great, thank you.
All right, I'm sharing the results. And so we have 6% voted for A, which is 120 projects, 50 million cubic yards. 13% voted for 145 projects, 65 million cubic yards. 42% for 175 projects, 85 million cubic yards. And 38% for 210 projects, 105 million cubic yards.
All right. Well, you guys did pretty well. The actual answer is D, but let's go ahead and get started, and I'll show you a little bit. I think the idea here, and the reason why I wanted to share that was that as we're talking about sand in the Southeast, it is a significant resource. And in fact, at a global level, the volume of sand that humans use is second only to water. That has a range of purposes, everything from concrete to how we make uses of our beaches. But that's a lot of sand, consuming over 50 billion metric tons of sand and gravel every year. If you think about that, that's 18 kilograms per person per day. And we are changing the way that sand has been managed across the globe. Thinking about how our sediment that comes down our rivers has been modified by dams across the country, thinking about the impacts that climate change and shoreline erosion are having on where beaches are located and the geological changes that occur across the globe. In fact, the United States government spends an average of $150 million a year, specifically on the beach nourishment and shoreline control erosion components that are associated with sand. And if you've visited our beaches here in the Southeast United States, you know that sand is a valuable resource and that some of our beaches are facing significant erosion challenges and impacts on the relationship with the upland communities around our beaches. Between 2008 and 18, we have completed over 208 beach nourishment projects from North Carolina through the southeast coast through Florida, which used over 150 million cubic yards of sand. And the table here shows some of the volumes and the amounts and the cost of that beach nourishment across the Southeast. So as we look forward, we need to think about both where is sand, what's the relationship between sand and those upland communities in terms of protection of the community, the tourism dollars that are associated with it, as well as the importance of sand in the water as it relates to ecological components. Because our sand is more than a resource for beach nourishment. It's a critical part of thinking about our beaches and allowing us from a tourism standpoint to be there. It's linked into our shipping industries as we think about dredging ports and what is pulled out of that dredged material standpoint. We've seen the erosion that comes with storms and sea level rise, but it's also important ecologically from a standpoint of birding and beach nesting sites. And offshore has a role in spawning areas or congregations of different fish and sharks. So how can we look comprehensively at how sand is being used across the Southeast, thinking about where it can be used, where it will come from in the future, understanding what the impacts of continual beach nourishment are, and understanding how we can be effective and work together on a resource that moves across our coastline and from our upland to our downland systems. The thing is that there are a lot of different players in the sandbox, if you think about it. When we talk about how we manage our sand, it involves a variety of federal partners, state partners, local governments and municipalities, as well as private organizations that deal with consulting and engineering firms that plan these areas, universities that do research, and those of us who are citizens and visit the coast or live within it also have a role in how we think about how our beaches and our offshore sand resources are managed. This significant role of sand across the Southeast, the volumes that we're looking at, the values that they have, is why the Southeast group decided to use our regional ocean data sharing funding that came into Socorro to look at sand resources across the Southeast. The idea being that there would be a long-term vision to increase the user-friendly collaboration mechanisms that engage state, federal, and local partners in long-term sustainable management of sand in the Southeast. And this particular project that I'm going to be focused on today was kind of to kickstart and understand what the current level of information is that's available, how it is being accessed, and what we might be able to do to work together to improve our ocean data around sand resource management. As this project got started, we also acknowledged that there's a variety of other efforts that are being undergone by different state, federal, and local partners. So we really wanted to work to bring those groups into the conversation here so that we were not being redundant on the outputs of this particular project. We did that in order to foster collaboration amongst the variety of different groups that are mapping sand resources and seafloor habitats, looking to connect our technical folks with our coastal managers and our communities in a way that enables communication and understanding of what the data is that can best be used to help make long-term management decisions, understanding our critical gaps around sand management in the region, and coming out with some new communication materials that can be used by partners to both communicate the value of sand in the Southeast and also to highlight where people can access and get be able to use existing resources from a one place as opposed to being spread out across multiple areas. We brought together a significant number of key partners into a steering committee to help guide the work. This included coastal management representatives from the 4 Southeast states, representatives from several of federal agencies, including NOAA, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and Socorro as a funder and sponsor of the work. In addition to our steering committee who helped guide the work that we were doing, we did sand constituent outreach, contacting over 50 sand constituents from across the Southeast to let them know about the project, and offering to hold one-on-one interviews to get their feedback on what some of the critical issues are around sand data and sand management, and what they could see as opportunities for us to collaborate in the future. We've invited all of those initial contacts as well as others to attend this webinar to discuss the draft results and hopefully get some additional feedback on the product. And we'll provide access to the full website and deliverables when it's complete in April of 2021. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about the first half of the project, which dealt with the relationship between and conversations with sand constituents across the Southeast United States. We interviewed 15 people one-on-one that are involved in sand management from a state government, local government, engineering, university, or nonprofit standpoint. You can see here that the greatest numbers were related to local governments and engineering firms, but we had a range of folks that covered all 4 states and included all of these different groups. We then looked at the outputs of those one-on-one interviews to identify common themes where there's opportunity for us to enhance our sand management understanding or improve distribution of best practices and resources. There are 4 core themes that came out of those conversations. The first relates to existing gaps in data, either from a standpoint of missing data and or data that is not as readily accessible to other groups. Some of the key points that came out as our opportunities to enhance data in the future for smart sand decision making involved increased understanding of work in state and shallow waters, both from a bathymetry as well as a depth of sand standpoint. Taking information on potential borrow sites that have been done on a regional basis and doing additional analysis about the viability of those sand resources, those sand areas as potential borrow sites in the future. Linking our engineering survey data that is done for individual projects to the larger set of data that is collected through state, federal, local governments, and universities in a way that we're having comprehensive understanding of what data is currently available. And improving our biological data, especially as that relates to in-water sand resources. What species are making use of them? How are different sand structures being used? And how can that be used to help inform the future of borrow areas for beach nourishment? Understanding that the ecological value in water, as well as the ecological value of the beaches themselves. The second component of our work was looking at our data access and tools. Where are people going to get information on sand? What are some of the main products that they are currently being used? And what are ways that these could be improved, enhanced, or brought to a level that could better help decision makers? Here we found that the level of dispersion across different sand sources can make it challenging to find. Many of the different organizations, scales, have different individual sites that you go to. So understanding how those are connected to one another and which place to go, depending on what information you need, is an opportunity that can be enhanced upon. Some of the places that folks go for federal data in particular relate to the Bureau of BOEM's Mineral Management Information System, which has done mapping of offshore federal water sand resources, and work done by USGS on sand and sediment type. Another place that people often turn, and especially from a consultant standpoint, is just to understand the bathymetry and the topographic characteristics in order to help guide where they go and do additional work in the future. And then long-term research studies that really dig into the details of what the sand depths information is, what type of sediment it is, and those that will enable you to understand what the viability is for different uses, is still being used, and having access to those varied research studies is important, especially from those who are doing the actual design of any projects. Another common theme that came up was some of the discussion around permitting and regulations. One of the challenges that arose was the timing that goes into permitting and regulations post-storms. Also concerns about restrictions on how funds can be used and potential changes in how those funds and what funds will be available in the future, providing opportunity to think about other funding sources for both from a nourishment and research standpoint. Some questions regarding differences in beach sand requirements and what can go onto a beach and limiting factors in terms of how that relates to the long-term resource availability from a nourishment standpoint. And then uncertainty if new methodologies are created in terms of how we put sand on a beach, things like increasing the number of dune systems that are put in behind a beach management project. Will that be funded? How can it be funded? And are there changes or differences in permitting that are required to enable that to work? The fourth area that came up was really related to a desire and an opportunity for us to continue to enable cross-boundary communication on this topic. Here, what we were talking about is that there were some opportunities, both from a research standpoint with BOEM funding that came in to play after Hurricane Sandy, which allowed for additional data collection by individual states and brought state researchers together, to the closing or shutting down of the Governor South Atlantic Alliance, which had brought state agencies together to discuss topics like sand management, that there are gaps in that collaboration which could be enhanced, and that in addition to the agencies talking to one another across different scales, that this connection between public and private organizations really could be beneficial. How can consultants feed into state management components? What's the link to individual environmental organizations or local community groups? And then again, discussion that's related to challenges to future funding that may come in to enable beach nourishment, and the opportunity to share best practices and mechanisms to do this type of work, both from a data standpoint as well as a regulation and permitting standpoint. So those were some of the initial pieces that came out of those one-on-one interviews, as well as conversation with our steering committee. And before I move on to the data resource standpoint of this project, I would love, if people are interested, to add some thoughts into the chat about what are there additional considerations that you would like us to include in this evaluation. Is there anything you saw missing from that suite of 4 that you think is critical, or interested in knowing whether or not we have included it in the broader list that I'm not sharing all of with you today? So please, I'll just give everyone a moment if you want to add anything into the chat of additional topics that could be included in our discussion.
Hey, Mary, it's Abby. We did have one, the United States Army Corps of Engineers Sand Study portal. It shows all beach projects and resources for projects.
Yeah, and we'll be going over that briefly as we get into the kind of what the portals are and what the ways that different data is currently being shared, which is the next section of this.
Perfect.
Very true. Did anything else pop up?
Nothing popped up, but guys, keep adding stuff in the question box and we'll make sure at the end of the presentation it gets to Mary.
Great, thanks a lot. So the first part of my presentation really focused on kind of what we heard from the standpoint of from stand constituents during our interview process. In addition to that, we did a research as to what are the existing data distribution tools and resources that are out there, pulling those so that we could pull those together into one report and then provide access to one website, so kind of a go-to place where you could find out about sand. And the Army Corps of Engineers Sand Project that was just mentioned is definitely one. So I'm going to highlight a few of those so you can see what type of information you'll be able to have access to in our final report, as well as through the website. So there are several existing sand data resources out there at a federal, state, and local level. Some of the key federal organizations are the Bureau of Energy Management, I'm sorry about the misspelling there, the Army Corps of Engineers, NOAA, and USGS. This type of information may be provided in an interactive portal where you can actually go in and see the maps. Others focus on more raw data versus synthesized data. So in the report, we'll be sharing kind of a brief table that gives you an overview of the type of information that you can gather through these different sources, as well as links to how you can go and access that data directly. We've also included notes on the primary sand data sources that are managed at the state level, and some examples of resources that are managed from local government standpoints. And I'm going to touch on a few of these in these next couple of slides. So from a federal standpoint, some of the resources that are used most often based on comments through our interviews with constituents is the Bureau of Energy's Management Marine Minerals Information System. This is an online tool that provides information on offshore sand resources in federal waters. It allows you to look at and see where potential sand resources are located, and helps to quantify whether the existing level of data that's associated with them. It also identifies some potential sand sites which may be viable or useful in future research projects. As was just mentioned, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is currently completing its South Atlantic Coastal Study, or SACS. Many of our participants in the interviews had participated as part of those teams. A subset of the SACS study is the sand availability and needs determination, the report of which was released. That document provides access and understanding of what a 50-year output of sand viability, resource viability from a local government or county perspective is, whether there are concerns about shortages or there is a long-term thinking that the sand will be available and can be a great resource to local governments and states. Another resource that takes a look at a combination of sand as one of its component is the NOAA and BOEM Marine Cadastre. In this, you have a data portal that is meant to help bring together multiple data layers and help in making management decisions. Sand being one of the components that you can look into, drawing a diagram on a specific sand area, ocean area, and understanding both some of the resources and data that's available, as well as the relationship to other uses. So these are some of the federal sites that are currently available. There are also others that are reports that look at point source data of sand, information on ecological value related to sand, and all of that information will be included in the report, as well as providing linkages from the website. In addition to this federal work, there are several state and local ways that data for sand is distributed and accessible. As I mentioned, one of the opportunities that came up after Hurricane Sandy was the Atlantic Sand Assessment Project. This provided funding to states to look at what the existing sand resources are within their state waters. This occurred between 2015 and 2016 with federal funding dedicated to it. And it enabled a lot of the states to really start to talk to each other and do some additional research in their state waters, and receive very positive feedback from the state managers that I talked with. Depending on which state you live in the Southeast United States, the way this data is distributed is variable, from a report to online tools like the Georgia Coastal Hazards Portal, which I'm showing here, highlighting some of the data points that were collected off of Jekyll Island. There are also some states also maintain sand inventories and data portals. In particular, Florida has this regional offshore sand source inventory, which provides a range of information on data on sand, how you go about looking at it, where it is available, and mapping it over time. In addition to the state side, local governments have an important role in decision making, and often are those who are covering the relationship with engineering firms and managers on bringing sand to the beach. In some cases, local governments do their own research, monitoring, data collection. For example, the work that's done in Carteret County, North Carolina, to do monitoring of their beaches over time and linking in from a beach commission standpoint and creating a beach preservation plan. The level of and role of local government, while having a significant role across the entire region, different funding levels, capacity, and beach erosion concerns makes it variable how the data is collected, shared, and used. Therefore, the report comes up with some ideas on what best practices could be used to help support additional data and sand management at different scales across the decision-making tree. So I've highlighted a few of the resources that we looked at, reviewed, and are incorporating, and which we'll be providing access to through our portal, our website on the Socorro site, as well as in our report. But another piece of information that we'd love to hear from you about is, are there other key resources that we should be incorporating or that perhaps we missed during our project? Take a pause here again, Abby, to see if any additional questions or comments that have come in before I do the last couple of slides.
Yeah, somebody mentioned the USS seabed data is very old and much of it is only descriptive. The others, BOEM and United States Army Corps of Engineers, are much newer and all quantitative.
Yes, that is definitely true. There's definitely a range, and we make some notes of the different timing and scale of some of the data resources in the report.
Perfect. And then we have some questions that I think I'll ask at the end of the webinar.
Great, sounds good. So I'll just do my last couple of slides then. So I've mentioned a couple times that the deliverables will be made available through our Socorro website. We're currently in the process of creating that site, which will provide direct access to several of the existing sites that are out there with brief descriptions, enabling people to come to one place. We'll also be talking a bit about overall the value and role of sand in the Southeast United States from an economic and social and ecological component, and then sharing some of our recommendations of how we can continue to enhance and maintain collaboration at a regional scale on this work, including some potential areas for future research and data collection. And on that last note, I just wanted to reiterate a few of the future opportunities that we discussed based on the combination of the review of the analytical resources that are currently available, as well as the interviews that we conducted with our stand constituents. One, that there's opportunity to maintain or enhance the collaboration between federal, state, and local partners. That there's been gaps in that from a standpoint of some of the challenges that have come with those relationships being associated with specific funding sources or with organizations that are no longer in existence, and finding ways to bring some of that collaboration back, in part to share best practices from data sharing across state and local governments, as well as just understanding some of the mechanisms and the way data is distributed is helpful. There were examples of both how the funding that BOEM provided to the states, as well as the collaboration that has gone on with the Army Corps of Engineers work. Being able to maintain that into the future builds those relationships long term. There is variability across the 4 different states in terms of how data is collected, shared, and made available. And there may be best practices that we can create and enable so that multiple states are providing access to data in a way that benefits both the engineers and the local governments and the decision makers, as well as helps to just inform citizens who are interested in sands across the Southeast. To do that, it would be helpful to have additional funding that could come into play to meet some of those data collection needs and/or the analysis of data, work to fill some of the key borrow area information gaps to understand the true viability of those resources, and thinking about how both researchers from a university standpoint, as well as agencies and consultants, could help fill in those needs. And making sure that as we create and collect that data, that it's done in a way that meets the needs of the managers so that that can be brought into their work. Also, enhancing our understanding of the ecological value of different sand structures so that our decision making around sand has both an economic and an ecological standpoint. If beach nourishment is going to continue at the rate that it currently is, our long-term use of sand could move further offshore, and we need to understand what impact that may have on the greater overall system. And finally, continuing to think about what the sources and funding of sand can be. More sand funding, sand nourishment dollars are starting to happen at a local scale as opposed to federal or state funding. And there have been some unique and different mechanisms that have enabled that support. Sharing that information, as well as thinking about the long-term viability of those funds, will be critical in addition to understanding the long-term viability and the use of the sand. So with that brief overview of the project, I'm going to stop my presentation and open the floor up to questions or comments from all of you. And thank you for the time. And thank you to all of the steering committee members, as well as those that were participated in the one-on-one interviews to help us gather this information.
Great, thanks, Mary. So if attendees have any questions, please type them in the chat box and I will pose them to Mary. And we did have a few couple data resources come up while you were talking, so I'm just going to quickly mention those. NOAA's NCEI index to marine and geological samples, the IMLGS database. It's not focused on sand per se, but nonetheless, it has relevant information within the database, like metadata on cores collected by various entities.
Okay, great.
And then also NOAA's National Ocean Surface database. And that's from Clint, so I'll make sure you get his information if you need to follow up.
Great, yeah, and we do. And Bob, Bob has actually taken the lead on pulling together the overview of the data sources. So don't know if you have any comments, Bob, on those two particular ones. I believe we've at least included the first in the report already.
Yes, both of them are mentioned in the report. It's just they weren't highlighted in this presentation, but we'll make sure that they are definitely noted going forward. And Clint, I might follow up with you later to get more information about that. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Bob and Mary. And then we had a question from Heath. Has the issue of ownership of sand data been brought up? Many of these sand source search efforts are funded privately or by small local communities with limited funds. These efforts are expensive and result in valuable data for the coastal community. Sometimes other entities can find and utilize this data to permit and construct their beach projects first and use up the sand source that the funding entity researched and counted on for their project.
So this is an interesting point that actually had some different variables depending on who you were talking to. So in some instances, the idea of ownership of data associated with a local government or an engineering firm that's going out and doing the survey, some were very open to sharing the information, acknowledging that the work is occurring in public trust areas, and that increasing the total area of understanding of sand, they're willing to share. Some do share through, it's included in their technical reports that they're required to submit in association with a permitting project. And so they're already providing some of that data, and the challenge is the mechanism of how you take that very specific project-related data and build it into other larger regional data sets and analysis. Other instances, there was a little bit more question, and I can see that becoming a greater challenge in areas where, you're really starting to even see some concerns and questions about, who has access to the data, who has access to the site, and how do you go about getting it. So it was a mixed bag, part of our conversation. It can be managed through, some of the guidelines in terms of how you set up to do your permitting process and what type of data needs to be shared. And then, of course, on the research side, there sometimes is a delay from a research standpoint in terms of wanting to analyze the data for their individual research project before making it public. So I think there's opportunity to continue to try to overcome those challenges.
Great, thanks, Mary. Are there any data in the marine cadastre that are not in the BOEM MMIS?
Most of the marine cadastre, the difference between those two would be that you can more easily access the relationship to other data later. So the marine cadastre is a decision-making tool that enables you to look at the combination of how sand relates to other uses. So how does it relate to some mammal, some species information, shipping lanes, other core data sets, so that if you're thinking about doing a project, what else would you need to consider or take into play? But it makes use of data sources that are out there. So it brings in some of the MMIS data, which is specific to sand, and allows you to look at it in relationship to other data sources, data pieces.
Great, and we have another data question. How much unique data is out there? Portals and organizations have shared data sets through organic collaborations. Does your report address this?
So our report addresses kind of where some of the natural collaborations are. And then it brings up some places where there seem to be gaps in the collaboration that could potentially be enhanced to bring data sources in. And I think probably the largest one that was out there, which kind of gets at what's the unique play that we have in terms of sand data comes in for different purposes and is collected for different reasons. And so when you're trying to look at them together, are you meeting the same timelines, needs? If you're getting a data set that's pre-borrow site, how does that relate to future? So there's two components. There's a spatial component that you need to think about when is the data collected, and then do we have all of the collaborations that could potentially bring data into the source? And one of the areas that came up multiple times is that link between the consulting and engineering firms that are going out there and collecting data, and the viability or the way that it can be used to help create a longer term data set of sand over time. So I think there's opportunity to enhance, kind of think about how that data can get pulled in on a more regular basis versus what was often done, which is, or what was done with that BOEM study after Hurricane Sandy, is you went out and did a lot for 2 years, collection of what's out there, and then it doesn't get maintained over time. So how do we create the function of maintaining those more detailed reports from multiple sources over time?
Great, thanks, Mary. And this one's from Deborah. Were there any major surprises from your work, or did the work underscore current understanding of challenges around sand in the Southeast?
I think some of the, I don't know, major surprises, it depends on how you qualify major. But I think, I think that idea, that relationship between the private industry, private engineering, and public entities, and continuing to maintain and enhance that over time was one area that I saw real opportunity and think there's real opportunity moving forward. And then I think I don't think this is an unknown or a surprise, but the differences between how states distribute and collect their own individual state data as well as local governments was surprising. Carteret County's, years of data collection as in terms of monitoring over time versus some of the places that are just starting. And then the relationship between just the economics of those individual communities and how do you account for that, the local government's ability to fund and support this work if that's where the pressure is going to be put over time. It's not equivalent across all of the communities. So that thinking, that kind of economic thinking on it is going to be important.
Great, thanks, Mary. And could you share your time frame for releasing the report and posting the information online?
Sure. So our time frame is we are going to be holding a next steering committee meeting to share the draft report coming up in March. We're currently in the process of then also translating this information onto the website. Our grant runs out, is scheduled to end the end of March, and our hope would be to have the website be able to go live for everyone in early April. And our game plan is to share that website with all of you who participated in this call, and it will be an opportunity to continue to provide feedback and something that we'll be able to update over for at least up until the end of the well, for me and the Conservancy, our fiscal year, but the state fiscal year, so through June. So I think there'll be a chance to provide some comments on that and make some additions after it goes up in April through June.
Great, thank you. And then a couple recommendations. Kudos on your presentation first. And Joni would like to suggest some international lessons learned and best practices from the UK in terms of offshore sand and gravel resources. They have excellent yearly physical biological monitoring requirements that are regulated by the Marine Management Organization. Perhaps invite someone from the UK to share their experiences.
Sure. And if I can start to travel again, I could go and visit and see some of that firsthand.
Oh, can I come with? That sounds like a great trip.
I'm getting a little travel stir crazy.
Me too. I wish we could do this in person. Fran has suggested the USGS has done some regional seismic side scan and bathy collections, for example, for Southern Long Bay off Myrtle Beach by Coastal Carolina. I would encourage more studies like this.
Yes, and that did come up both, but that study came up as an example of long-term, and then some of the work that different groups are doing in terms of regional sediment management, in terms of regional being, a subset area where sand moves within it. For instance, the Charleston district of the Army Corps of Engineers currently has a regional sediment management group. How we can do that as ways to enable that cross-pollination across different organizations as well. So 2 tiers there of examples of kind of smaller research, sub-regional projects, if you're thinking about the whole Southeast, that really detailed work that was done in places like off of Long Bay, and then these collaborative groups that allow for communication over time.
Thanks, Mary. We've got another question come in. BOEM, United States Army Corps of Engineers, and Florida Department of Environmental Protection are working together on a beta fines or sediment sorting study that may implicate the traditional definition of sand compatibility to a project. Highly recommend you integrate that perspective into what constitutes a sand resource.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And we did chat with them. They were one of the groups that we interviewed in this process. So we do have some details on that. And that idea of what implements the sand, as I mentioned, came up. So good point, and thanks for sharing.
And that is it for questions. Oh wait, we have one from Susan. Suggest integrating Louisiana and Texas as well.
That would be wonderful. I would love to. My job now works from, I now work across both the South Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. So the idea of doing something similar that expands the Gulf states would be great. So if anyone, definitely worth thinking about. Thanks.
And that is it for questions. Maybe we'll give it one more second before we end the webinar. I'm not seeing any more come in. We have had quite a few. All right, seeing that it's 12:50 and we have no more questions, we're going to go ahead and end the webinar. Mary and Bob, thank you so much for the great presentation. And as Mary mentioned, a recording of this webinar and a copy of the slides will be sent to everybody who has registered. And once the final report and the website goes live, we're also going to be sending that to everyone who has registered. So you'll have access to the final results. And if you all need anything, please reach out to me and I'll make sure those questions get to Mary and Bob.
Thank you for the opportunity to present. Thanks to all who participated in the call today and all who were part of this project as we were pulling together. I look forward to hearing additional thoughts from all of you.
All right, bye folks. Enjoy the rest of your lunch hour.